The arrival. The summer air in Charleston clung to the skin like molten wax, thick, stifling, and impossible to escape. Even now, centuries later, when historians crack open the sealed colonial records, they still write about the heat of that year, as if the very climate itself had conspired to press the town into a simmering crucible. But it wasn't the weather that left the deepest mark in the summer of 1716. It was what happened inside a kitchen that had once smelled of roasted meat and sugared rum, but would soon stink of ash, charred cotton, and the acrid, iron tang of shackled wrists. When the first slave entered Charleston aboard the Portuguese ship Santa Maria in September of 1701, no one could have guessed that she carried with her the patience of a strategist and the fury of a survivor. To the auction block, she was simply another strong young woman. To Edmund Greyfield, master of the sprawling Greyfield estate, she was property, bought for $42 sterling. But to herself, Esperanza de Lima, she was something more dangerous than property. She was memory. She was witness. And she was the spark, waiting for tinder. For 15 years she watched. 15 years she served, silent as shadow, listening to the laughter of men who believed themselves gods. Men who treated human lives as crops to harvest, as livestock to brand. They thought her invisible. They thought her broken. They thought wrong. And so we begin, with a woman standing barefoot in a Charleston marketplace, the salt of the Atlantic still crusted on her skin, her dark eyes unblinking as a pale, blue-eyed planter fixed her price. She did not cry. She did not plead. She memorized the smell of tarred ropes, the sting of iron shackles, the particular sound Greyfield's boots made against the dock. These details would settle in her mind like seeds in fertile soil, waiting for their time to bloom. The auction block, the Charleston auction square, was a carnival of cruelty. Merchants called out prices the way fishmongers might shout about cod, and planters ran their hands along dark-skinned backs as if inspecting the grain of fine wood. Esperanza stood among 180 others brought from Angola, her hair shorn, her body dusted with the residue of weeks at sea. Greyfield approached like a man examining horses. His height, just over 6 feet, cast a shadow long enough to drape across her bare shoulders. His pale blue eyes swept her up and down without a flicker of doubt. He was not deciding if he would buy her, but how much profit she could yield. When he lifted her chin with a thumb, she did not recoil. That, oddly, made him smirk. Resistance he could break. But this silence, this eerie composure, intrigued him. She would serve well in his house, he thought, where the Rice Council often dined and drank, where a woman could pour and clear and fetch without daring to speak. To the others in the crowd, Esperanza was forgettable. Average height, strong but not remarkable, scarred across her shoulders with patterns no white man understood. To Greyfield, she was valuable livestock. To herself, she was royal blood, daughter of a village chief murdered by Portuguese raiders. Her scars were not random. They were the record of lineage, a birthright carved into her flesh with fire and blade. As the gavel fell and Greyfield's purchase was confirmed, she whispered, not in fear but in a vow no one understood, "O fogo espera, the fire waits." Greyfield Estate. The Greyfield Estate sprawled across 3,000 acres of swamp and rice field, a monument to cruelty disguised as prosperity. Wooden shacks lined the dikes where slaves bent their backs under the brutal sun. Overseers, on horseback, carried whips coiled like serpents at their sides. The main house, whitewashed and proud, stood at the center, a place of imported chandeliers, oak dining tables, and a massive coal furnace shipped brick by brick from England. That furnace fascinated Esperanza. She learned its moods, its appetite. When the cook stoked it, she memorized how quickly it consumed coal, how long it held heat, how iron rods glowed like captured lightning inside its belly. Others saw it as a tool for feeding masters. She saw it as a beast, a caged inferno, patient and always hungry. The house was more than a residence, it was a council chamber. Once a month, 14 of the wealthiest planters convened there to drink imported rum, dine on beef fattened in England, and laugh about the breaking of human lives. They called themselves the Rice Council. Esperanza called them something else. The Circle. The Rice Council. The Circle's names would become legend whispered in quarters and fields. Sutton, Peaton, Rutherford, Harrington, Caldwell, Fairfax, Kingsley, Warwick, Crichton, Norris, Hartwell, Baxter, Fielding, and Greyfield himself. Each man was an architect of misery. One perfected breeding programs, pairing men and women like cattle. Another devised cages designed to cook human beings slowly beneath the sun. Another used family separation as his preferred tool of obedience. They competed in cruelty, swapping stories the way merchants might swap tips about spices. Esperanza listened, refilling glasses with rum she had not tasted, clearing plates she had not touched. They believed she did not understand their English, but she learned quickly, disguising comprehension behind an obedient blank stare. She memorized everything: names of wives, the hours men drank most heavily, the weaknesses of their bodies, Fairfax's bladder, Sutton's gout, Greyfield's pride. For 15 years she played the role of silent shadow, but her mind was a ledger far sharper than Greyfield's account books. Each act of cruelty was recorded, each name weighted, each debt waiting to be paid, the silent bond what no one anticipated, what even Esperanza had not dared to hope, was that she might find love in the belly of this hell. His name was Wayne, though plantation records flattened him into Boy Tom. Strong, broad-shouldered, with eyes that held both pain and defiance, he labored in the fields of Rutherford, but was often loaned out for Greyfield's heaviest work. They met in stolen minutes, a glance in the kitchen doorway, a whispered phrase, in Portuguese disguised as a work song, a hand brushing another while passing buckets at the well. Over time, those fragments became something dangerous, a plan. Together, they built an invisible web of information across plantations, using songs and gestures to spread whispers about patrol schedules, sympathetic allies, and escape routes leading south to Spanish Florida. But Greyfield had plans of his own. By spring of 1715, he had decided Esperanza would be moved to his breeding compound. She would no longer serve wine and listen in silence. She would be reduced to womb, forced to bear children for the next generation of his empire. That night, by the fallen cypress deep in the swamp, Wayne begged her to run. He knew a Spanish trader who could smuggle them to safety. They could be free by week's end. But Esperanza shook her head. "Running saves us," she whispered. "But it changes nothing. The circle will remain. They will keep building cages. They will keep breeding pain. If I go, I abandon everyone else to them. No, we will not run, we will burn." And in that moment, the furnace at Greyfield Estate stopped being a kitchen tool. It became destiny. The next Rice Council meeting was set for June 23, 1716. 14 men would arrive at Greyfield, armed with arrogance, rum, and their bottomless appetite for cruelty. What they did not know was that for 15 years, the quiet woman who poured their wine had been studying them like specimens, memorizing their habits, preparing their chains, learning the moods of the furnace. The circle believed themselves untouchable. But the fire waits. And on that sweltering night, in June, the fire would feast. The furnace awakens. The Greyfield kitchen was not just a room, it was a living beast. By June of 1716, Esperanza knew the rhythm of its lungs, the way the furnace exhaled smoke in steady sighs, the way the fire within growled when coal was poured, too quickly. She could feel its mood through the stone floor beneath her bare soles. To everyone else, it was just a tool. To her, it was a predator. For weeks, she had been feeding it like a secret pet, adding more coal than necessary, whispering to it in Portuguese as she cleaned knives. It wasn't madness, it was ritual. The fire became her confidant, the only thing in the estate that listened without cruelty, the only thing that answered back with a low, steady roar. At night, when the estate was hushed and the overseers lay, drunk in their quarters, Esperanza would sit by the furnace and imagine the circle seated around it, not in comfort, but in chains. She pictured the sweat beading on their powdered foreheads, the helpless clenching of their fists as iron bit their wrists. She could see it so clearly, it was as if the fire itself was showing her visions. She wasn't afraid of it. She was in league with it. The last meeting with Wayne on June 20th. Word spread like a sickness. Wayne had been sold. The papers were already signed. James Rutherford had bought him for 60 sterling. After the Rice Council met, Wame would be marched off Greyfield property forever. That night, Esperanza met him by the fallen cypress tree for the last time. The swamp hummed with frogs and cicadas, but their voices trembled with urgency. "Run," he whispered. "We can still go tonight. I know the paths. I know where the marsh stays shallow. By dawn they won't find us." Esperanza pressed her forehead against his. "Running saves us. But what about the others? What about the women they breed like animals? The children they rip away before they can even speak their mother's tongue? No. If we go, nothing changes." Her voice was low, steady, almost frightening in its certainty. "I have been listening for 15 years. I know when they drink too much. I know who cannot hold his bladder. I know who trusts his food too easily. I know where the keys are kept. I know when the doors are unguarded. They have taught me every weakness without knowing it. Wayne. The fire waits. And this week, it will eat." He wept then. Not for himself, but for her. He knew what was coming, knew the cost. They kissed as if trying to memorize the taste of each other. By dawn, he was gone. The day before. The kitchen was her theater now. Every pot scrubbed, every knife sharpened, every chain tested for strength. She polished the crystal glasses until they gleamed, not because she cared for Greyfield's vanity, but because every reflection reminded her of what was about to happen. When the other house slaves asked why she worked with such mechanical precision, she smiled faintly and said, "The masters expect perfection." That was all it took to quiet suspicion. Perfection was their currency. By mid-morning, she began stoking the furnace in careful intervals. It had to look like she was preparing for a feast, nothing more. By evening, the stone walls radiated heat like a sun trapped indoors. Sweat soaked her shift, but she did not slow her rhythm. Each shovelful of coal felt like another verse in a hymn only she and the fire understood. That night she sat by the furnace and spoke aloud for the first time in years. Not to the slaves, not to God, but to the men who would soon be her audience. "You think you are kings," she whispered in broken English. "Tomorrow, you are coals." The arrival June 23rd, 1716. A day that dawned heavy with swamp heat and the metallic smell of rain that never came. The circle arrived one by one, as predictable as the tide. Marcus Sutton first, with his red face and arrogance, striding in early to whisper with Greyfield about new ways of breaking slaves. William Peaton with his retinue of armed overseers, men who looked as cruel as their master. Rutherford with the smugness of a judge who wrote laws only to twist them. Fairfax, Caldwell, Harrington. They came like carrion birds gathering on the same tree, each one blind to the storm brewing under their feet. The house filled with the clink of glasses, the scrape of boots on oak floors, the laughter of men who thought themselves untouchable. Esperanza drifted among them, her expression calm, her ears tuned to every word. To them she was background. To the fire, she was conductor. The poison in the brandy at 9 p.m. After the meal, she brought out the brandy decanter. She poured it with practiced hands, her face blank as she filled each glass. The circle toasted prophets, toasted breeding programs, toasted the expansion of civilization. One sip, then another. Heat. A tightening in the stomach. A wave of dizziness. They laughed it off at first, too much rum, too little air. But their laughter began to slur, their eyes glassy, their hands trembling. Sutton swore under his breath. Peaton blinked rapidly, confused. Rutherford's face grew pale. Edmund Greyfield, the host, realized too late. His hand slammed against the table, his voice thick and slurred. "Gentlemen, we've been..." And then his knees gave way. The mighty master of Greyfield collapsed on his imported Persian carpet, gasping like a fish. One by one, the circle toppled, chairs scraped, bodies slumped, glasses spilled. The only sound was the imported German clock ticking toward midnight, and Esperanza stood in the doorway watching them fall, her face as unreadable as ever. The chains took hours, but she did not tire. One by one, she dragged their bodies across the polished floors down into the kitchen. She shackled their wrists and ankles with the same iron they had used on countless slaves. She stuffed their mouths with raw cotton, their own empire gagging them in silence. By 2 a.m., the circle was arranged in a perfect ring around the coal furnace, their expensive coats damp with sweat, their faces slack with drugged sleep. The furnace glowed red, its belly fed to the brim, its heat pulsing like the heart of hell itself. Esperanza sat on a low stool, sharpening her knife against the stone, the rhythm slow and deliberate. She hummed a Portuguese lullaby, the same song her mother once sang before the raiders came. When the first man stirred awake, the firelight caught her face. Calm, focused, eternal. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said in perfect English. Justice burns slower than coal, but it burns complete. And with that, the kitchen of Greyfield Estate transformed into a courtroom, the furnace into executioner, and Esperanza de Lima into judge and jury. The trial by fire. When the first pair of eyes fluttered open, the kitchen seemed to pulse with heat. The men who had once held thousands in bondage now lay in a circle, shackled hand and foot, their silk waistcoats darkened by sweat. Above them the coal furnace roared. Not a background hum this time, but a voice guttural and alive, filling every inch of stone and air. They groaned, tried to speak, but their mouths were stuffed with raw cotton, the very crop that had lined, their pockets now choking them silent. Esperanza stood, knife in hand, her face lit red by the furnace glow. No overseer at her back, no whip raised against her. Just her and 14 men who once called themselves kings. The courtroom. "Gentlemen," she began, her English smooth, deliberate, nothing like the broken whispers she'd used before. "Welcome to the council meeting you did not expect." Her footsteps echoed as she walked the circle, pausing at each man. Their eyes darted toward one another, pleading silently for explanations, for rescue. None came. "For 15 years, she said, "I have carried your plates. I have filled your glasses. I have listened as you laughed about suffering." She knelt by Marcus Sutton, who thrashed weakly against his iron bonds. "You break spirits. You make humans into husks. Tonight I let you feel what it is to be hollow." To Rutherford. "You sell families apart like calves. Tonight you sit in your own herd, bound, waiting for the butcher." And finally to Greyfield himself. "You owned me. You thought me animal. Now, animal holds the knife." She rose, spreading her hands as though pronouncing judgment. "This is not a massacre. This is a trial. The fire is the jury, and the sentence is decided." The ledger of crimes from the table behind her, she lifted Greyfield's leather ledger, the book where names were turned into currency. She opened it, reading aloud with a calmness that felt colder than screams. April 12th, 1715, boy named Caesar, 14 years old, sold for breeding. His mother wept until she bled from the throat. She turned a page. June 3rd, 1715, woman named Rebecca, dead in childbirth. Value lost, 20 sterling. Note, improved diet of breeding females. Each entry was a hammer. Each name a ghost raised in the room. The shackled men writhed as though the words themselves scalded. Esperanza snapped the book shut. "You counted their lives in coin. Tonight I count yours in coal." The red iron sermon she plunged an iron poker into the furnace. The metal glowed red, shimmering like a vein of molten sun. Slowly, deliberately, she held it near Greyfield's face. Not touching, just close enough for him to feel his skin prickle and burn from proximity. "This is not cruelty," she whispered. "This is symmetry." The room filled with muffled cries as she moved around the circle, lowering the iron near each man, letting them smell their own fear cooking into the air. She did not need to strike hard. The anticipation was worse than the pain, the certainty that the glowing metal would kiss flesh at any moment. One by one she branded not their skin but their memory, searing terror into the same minds that once invented cages and whips. Each time she touched metal to flesh, the furnace roared louder as if approving. The confessions by dawn, the heat in the kitchen was unbearable. The men were drenched, their faces slack with exhaustion, their muffled voices cracking with animal sounds. Esperanza removed the cotton from one mouth. Benjamin Fairfax, the eldest of the council. "Speak," she said. He sputtered, coughed, begged, not for forgiveness, but for life, for mercy. Esperanza tilted her head. "Mercy. You know, the word." She stuffed the cotton back in, her expression unreadable. She repeated this with others. Some cursed her, some tried to bribe her, some wept like children. Each response she met with the same calm smile, as if she had expected nothing more. Nothing less, you see, she told them. Even in chains you still believe your voices can save you, but tonight only fire speaks. The circle of ashes the sun lifted above the swamps. The furnace glowed white-hot, its hunger insatiable. The shackled men writhed weakly now, too dehydrated to fight. Their strength had withered into trembling whimpers. Esperanza stepped into the center of the circle, the heat wrapping her like a mantle. For years you decided who lived, who bred, who broke. You wrote laws as if you were gods, but gods do not bleed, and gods do not burn. Men do. She turned toward the furnace, eyes shining in the reflected firelight. "The jury is ready." And with that, she began the final phase. The transformation of the council into ash, arranging their ends as carefully as she had once arranged their dinner plates. The sentence. The Greyfield kitchen no longer smelled of food. It reeked of iron, sweat, and a kind of dread so thick it clung to the walls like soot. The coal furnace blazed white-hot, the bricks glowing faintly, its roar steady and patient. Esperanza stood barefoot in its heat, her shift soaked and clinging to her skin. Around her, the circle of 14 men sagged in their shackles, once masters of the Carolina lowlands, now livestock awaiting slaughter. She did not shout. She did not rage. Her voice was soft, steady, as though she were reading scripture. "Justice burns slower than coal," she said, "but it burns complete." The first offering she dragged Edmund Greyfield first, the man who had bought her, renamed her, silenced her. His muffled cries thrashed against the cotton in his mouth. For years, he had ordered men whipped, women broken, children sold. His hands had never touched a plow, yet thousands had bled for his rice fields. She leaned close, whispering in Portuguese, so only he would understand. "Meu pai espera por você no fogo." My father waits for you in the fire. And then she shoved him forward. The furnace swallowed him whole, its roar leaping higher, sparks clawing into the air like spirits freed. The smell came instantly, burning silk, searing flesh. The other 13 jerked against their chains, their muffled screams rising in unison. Esperanza did not flinch. The circle collapses. One by one, she fed the circle to the fire. Not quickly, not mercifully. She dragged them in order, the way they always sat at their council table, as if mocking the ritual they'd kept for years. Sutton, the breaker of spirits. Rutherford, the seller of families. Fairfax, the breeder of women. Kingsley, the master of seasoning. Baxter, the youngest, whose laughter had rung the loudest. Each man screamed until the cotton scorched in his mouth, until the fire stole his voice. Their deaths were not sudden but stretched, drawn out by the furnace's insatiable hunger. The kitchen became a theater of heat and shadows, every scream a hymn, every crack of bone a verse. Outside, the slaves in the quarters heard it. They could not see, but they listened. Some prayed, some wept, some smiled in silence. Because for the first time, The master's screams filled the night. The witness. When the last body was dragged to the fire, Esperanza sat on her stool again, humming the lullaby she had sung since childhood. She did not weep. She did not laugh. She simply sharpened her knife, methodical, calm, waiting until the furnace finished its feast. When the door burst open 3 days later, colonial officers staggered back at the sight. 14 piles of charred remains in a perfect circle, blackened chains still clamped to bone, cotton fused to teeth, and in the corner, Esperanza, calm, silent, sharpening her blade as if dinner still needed preparing. She looked up, her eyes flat, her face smeared with coal dust. The officers demanded an explanation. She gave only one phrase in broken English. Justice burns slower than coal, but burns complete. The aftermath, Governor Robert Johnson ordered the record sealed. No trials, no public hangings. Too dangerous. If word spread that a single enslaved woman had annihilated the most powerful men in the colony, the system itself might fracture. The official report said nothing. The fields went back to work. The Greyfield estate stood silent, its furnace bricked up, never lit again. But in the slave quarters, the story lived. Whispers carried it from plantation to plantation, from mother to child. They called her not Esperanza, but Achama, the flame. The legend, even now, 3 centuries later, locals in South Carolina whisper that on certain summer nights when the air is thick and the cicadas scream, the Greyfield ruins glow faintly in the dark. Some say, you can hear muffled cries as if cotton still smothers the mouths of men long dead. Others swear the furnace roars back to life, fed not by coal but by memory. And always, they say, a lullaby drifts through the swamp in Portuguese, soft and steady, the sound of a mother soothing a child, or a daughter luring monsters into the fire. Esperanza de Lima vanished from the records, her fate erased. But the legend remained. The woman who turned a kitchen into a courtroom, a furnace into a gallows, and the screams of masters into a song. The ghost in the furnace history tried to erase her. Paperwork locked away in Charleston's archives. Names scrubbed, dates omitted. The Greyfield estate left to rot until swamp ivy wrapped its bones. But history has cracks, and through them, stories leak like smoke. 300 years later, the Greyfield Massacre is no longer just an event. It's a haunting. The Forbidden Archive in 1924, a Charleston historian named Marion Latimer stumbled across a leather-bound ledger misfiled in the county courthouse. Inside were purchase records, human names reduced to columns of coin. Tucked between them was a page scorched black, the ink blistered but still legible. June 23, 1716. Circle convened. Meeting interrupted. All lost. Furnace. Latimer wrote in her journal that when she touched the page, she smelled smoke, though no fire was present. Weeks later, she was found. Dead in her study, the journal remained. Her fingers, they said, were blackened as though she'd handled burning coal. The swamp stories ask locals near the Ashley River about Greyfield, and their eyes flicker. Some will change the subject. Others will tell you in hushed tones, on humid nights when the air hangs heavy and the marsh frogs fall silent, you can hear it, the faint scrape of chains dragging across stone. A woman's voice humming, steady and soft, threading through the swamp grass. Hunters have sworn they saw a glow rising from the old estate foundations, like a furnace relit, though the hearth has been bricked shut for centuries. They say if you get too close, you'll see shadows moving in a circle, writhing, bound, mouths open in silent screams. The legend of Achama among descendants of enslaved Africans in the Carolinas. The story never died. Esperanza de Lima is not spoken of as a murderer, but as Achama, the flame. She is invoked in lullabies and whispered prayers, in coded songs sung under breath, not as ghost, but as guardian, a warning to oppressors. Fire remembers, mothers still rock their children with Portuguese fragments. Durma criança, the fire waits. To them, Esperanza is proof that even in chains, one woman could strike fear into the hearts of kings. The tourist dare in the 1970s, teenagers began daring each other to break into the Greyfield ruins. They'd sneak in with flashlights and beer, scrawling names on the crumbling stone. Some came back laughing. Others refused to speak of what they'd seen. One group swore they found the furnace still hot to the touch, though the air outside was cool. Another claimed they heard humming echoing from the dark, though no one else was inside. And every few years someone disappears in those woods. Their last known words, according to police transcripts: "We're gonna see if the fire's still burning," the unfinished sentence. The official record ends with sealed documents and burned pages. The folklore ends with whispers of a furnace that never dies. But the truth? The truth is stranger. Some say Esperanza herself walked into the swamp after the massacre and vanished. Others say she climbed into the furnace alongside her captors, offering herself to the fire as the final sacrifice. But the most unsettling theory is the simplest, that she never left the kitchen at all. That when the officers found her sharpening knives 3 days later, she was already more myth than flesh. That she chose silence because no earthly language could capture what she had become. The closing flame today. The Greyfield estate is gone, devoured by marshland. Only a foundation remains, a skeletal outline in the mud, but every year around late June the swamp glows faintly at night, as though a furnace deep underground is still alive, still breathing, and those who listen carefully swear they hear it: the soft scrape of a knife against stone, the rhythm of chains shifting, and above it all a lullaby in a language most do not understand. Esperanza de Lima was one woman, one shadow in a world built to erase her. But her fire lit something that has never gone out, because coal cools, ash settles, but legends, they burn forever. The ember in the present, 3 centuries have passed, yet the story of Esperanza de Lima refuses to die. Historians still debate whether the Greyfield Massacre even happened. Official records are vague. Pages are missing. The governor's seal covers most surviving documents, but silence is its own confession. When the powerful bury something this deep, it's because they're afraid of what will crawl out if it breathes again. And Esperanza breathes. The modern reckoning. In Charleston's archives, locked in acid-free boxes, there are still burned fragments. Ledgers, lists, receipts. Every historian who studies them admits the same thing. Standing near those charred pages, you feel heat on your skin. Too much to be imagination. Too steady to be coincidence. Some say that's just the power of suggestion. Others whisper it's the fire still waiting. The question isn't whether Esperanza existed. The question is why her story was erased. Because if one enslaved woman could dismantle an empire of 14 men in a single night, what did that mean for all the others forced into silence? The haunting of Justice Drive through South Carolina's back roads in late June, windows down, and you may feel it. Air suddenly hotter, heavier, like standing too close to a flame. Swamp fog gathers low, carrying the faint scent of ash. And if you're unlucky or chosen, you'll hear it. A lullaby, soft and patient, humming through the trees. Not a warning, not a curse. A reminder that justice doesn't vanish. That some fires take centuries to burn themselves out. The Greyfield estate is gone. The councilmen are dust. But the kitchen remains. In memory, in legend, in the way the land itself seems to remember. Esperanza de Lima is not just a name in sealed archives. She is the echo of every scream silenced by history, every ledger entry that reduced a person to profit, every furnace that waited too long to be fed. And maybe, just maybe, she is still out there. In the ash, in the heat, in the lullabies mothers still sing, not to soothe children but to remind them. Coal cools, flesh burns, but justice is fire, and fire never forgets.